Cameron Smith and Marc Leishman shocked the entire world when they decided to abandon the PGA Tour and join LIV Golf instead. But convincing them to switch sides wasn't as simple as writing up a big money check. In fact, Greg Norman had to find some super creative solutions to sign the duo. So what did it take to lure the Aussie stars over to the Saudi League? Well, keep watching to find out. First up, Smith and Leishman were clutch signings for LIV Golf. It's been a strange couple of months for Norman's upstart league. On one hand, we've seen some stellar invitationals going right down to the wire, but at the same time, they do seem to be losing ground against the PGA Tour, especially in terms of their financial advantage. Don't get us wrong, we're sure that LIV's still got that bottomless pit of cash to fall back on. It's just that with Tiger Woods leading the association into a new era of golf, which also looks very similar to the Australians' plan, it can be kinda hard to see why anyone would switch over. That being said, it does seem like the deal was already in place before any of these things even materialized. Oh, and then there's the antitrust lawsuit as well, which could completely change the power dynamics once again. One thing's for sure though, the Saudi League was losing momentum in its fight against the tour, and these two bombshell signings brought the limelight back. After all, Smith and Leishman are pretty high on the world golf rankings list. Oh yeah, we know that they didn't have the best of debuts, but honestly, when you're talking about invitationals and who's got the upper hand in terms of media attention, these things don't actually matter. Besides, there's that Australian connection between the duo and LIV Golf's CEO as well, which probably made the negotiations a lot smoother than they would have been otherwise. Up next, the business model that attracted Smith and Leishman. If there's anything that we've learned over the past few years, it's that Greg Norman's a cunning operator and has definitely got the chops to transfer his leadership skills off the golf course as well. We mean, it's kind of wild to think how he has single-handedly backed the tour into a corner and completely shifted the game over a span of what, a few months? With that said, even if you've got unlimited cash at your disposal, it can still be quite difficult to convince golfers to join you. Like, they're already some of the highest paid athletes in the world, so just luring them with big checks isn't exactly feasible. On top of that, a lot of the tour's members are also incredibly loyal to the association because, well, they did kind of grow up dreaming about competing on the big stage. And that's why the Aussie CEO had to switch up his strategy to bring his two compatriots on board, as they weren't entirely convinced by the big paycheck. So instead, he promised them a 25% stake in a LIV Golf franchise. Now, you might be wondering what that even means, since the Saudi League doesn't really have any established teams as of right now. Well, apparently, they are going to have a model similar to something like the MLB, except on a global scale. We're talking franchises that represent different countries. And just so it happens, the new duo could actually end up running the Australian team. Following up, Norman explains Cameron Smith's thinking process. Since Smith is the only golfer inside the top 10 to defect, there were a lot of question marks raised about why he'd ever leave the PGA Tour, especially with such a bright future ahead of him. But according to the CEO of the Saudi League, it's all about creating value. You see, while building a legacy within the association is definitely important for most golfers, Smith is a bit of a pioneer in terms of seeking opportunities, and it seems like LIV seemed like the right fit for him at the time. Like, you don't even have to look that far back to see other sports doing similar things. Cricket, for instance, has played an instrumental role in bringing this approach forward. Plus, Norman thinks that he could build a golfing empire that's similar to the Indian Premier League, which is a massive sporting spectacle that earns billions in revenue. Speaking to the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, the 67-year-old said that Smith sees an IPL-like opportunity within the Australian market as well. After all, they've been kind of starved of high-quality players for a long time. We mean, there's such a dearth of big events like the President's Cup, which, by the way, only goes down once every 7 to 10 years. And that's just wasted potential. So he hopes to bring balance to the force by returning some of that revenue and value back to his home country. And honestly, he's definitely got a valid point. What's more, the Aussie also confirmed talks with Adam Scott. Of course, when you're talking about some of the top Australian golfers, you can't mention Adam Scott, who, albeit not being at the top of his game for a few years, is still regarded as one of the greats. So signing him alongside Smith and Leishman was obviously a no-brainer for Greg Norman. After all, he would have been the perfect candidate to lead the Australian franchise in the planned global league. That being said, it looks like the 42-year-old wasn't quite ready to cut ties with the PGA Tour just yet. And according to the LIV CEO, the negotiations to tempt him over transfer to the Upstart League broke down earlier this year. Now, obviously, he could have a million reasons not to join his Aussie compatriots, but judging by what he said over the past couple of years, it's probably something to do with reputation. Don't get us wrong, we're sure that he would have been just fine performing in the invitationals as well. It's just that with his opponents as a member of the Order of Australia for his service to golf at the elite level, he's probably worried about throwing it all away and tarnishing his legacy. On top of that, it's not like he's performing at the top of his game these days either. We mean, he finished the BMW Championship with a total score of 8 under par, slotting him in 42nd place. So he wouldn't have to set fire to whatever events LIV Golf's got planned anyway. Coming up, Norman outlines potential plans for Team Australia. With Scott out of the equation for LIV Golf's Australian team, the mantle of responsibility is now being held by Cameron Smith and Marc Leishman. And even though they aren't the most experienced people out there, especially when it comes to stuff like forming an entire team for your country, Greg Norman thinks they've got the chops to do it. According to him, they'll have complete control over the selection process, meaning that they could approach it in a way that suits them. Having said that, perhaps the greatest challenge that they'll have to overcome will be finding suitable players to lead the charge. After all, most of the top Aussies apart from them are still PGA Tour members, so they're definitely not going to be up for it. But the 67-year-old thinks that they could potentially take a different approach and look at some of the younger golfers instead. Obviously, they probably don't have the resources to scout players. Norman, though, seems to have reassured them that he'll help them in their pursuit to find exciting talent. As a matter of fact, the Aussie's already got his sights on 4 or 5 youngsters who have got what it takes to represent the country on the big stage. On top of that, some of them have Asian roots as well, which could definitely add some extra value in terms of financial backing. Finally, Smith and Leishman will usher LIV Golf into a new era. There's been a lot of talk over the past few weeks about whether the two Australians made a mistake by joining the Saudi League. We mean the PGA Tour is definitely gaining ground, so the criticism makes sense. That said, they would have never gotten the same treatment or opportunities within the association. Why? Well, you see, at LIV Golf, they're the top dogs and can influence the direction and decision making. On top of that, Norman's right in saying that there's a massive void in Australia, which despite the tour's negligence, is still one of the top golfing markets on the planet. So there's no better way to capitalize on this gap than bringing in 2 of the best in the country. Also, work has already begun for finalizing the Upstart League's first Australian event in April next year. For instance, the league's representatives have been touring all over the country looking for suitable venues, and in total, they've inspected more than 20 courses, with Royal Sydney being the only one to deny their request. Oh, and according to the 67-year-old, we can expect the decision by the end of the month, although chances are that it'll either end up being Gold Coast or Sydney. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think that Cameron Smith made the right call by leaving the PGA Tour? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.